welcome to the D3D4 Football Podcast with me, your host, James Richards. Thank you for tuning in to another D3D4 Football Podcast, the podcast covering League 1 and 2 football. If you're new listeners to us, thank you for tuning in today. Looking forward to having your thoughts about what we discuss and about what we produce. Really happy man today I am on this podcast because Oxford United went to see them play Gillingham yesterday, massive victory, but it's actually been just a fantastic and almost surreal week for Oxford fans, so we'll get into that. I am joined to discuss all the action this week by EFL reporter for Sky and Quest, Si Watts. How are you doing, Si? Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, like yourself, happy Oxford United fans. So I suppose I have to try not to make it too much of an Oxford loving this morning, but as weeks go, I can't remember many better than that.
Yeah, no promises on that, fans. And we're also joined by the man who's a plethora of knowledge about all things EFL. It is Gabe Sutton. Welcome back to the podcast, Gabe.
You're too kind, James. Thank you. It's good to be on.
Yeah, excellent. Now, I won't do too much preamble this week because we've got a lot to get through and slightly pressed for time. So let's jump straight in and start in League 1.
League 1.
And for a change, it's nice to talk about Oxford at the beginning of the League 1 roundup. And in a very positive light, we've had 3 results this week that have just, I think, blown Oxford fans' minds. Obviously, we discussed the 6-0 win over Lincoln last episode, and that was surreal enough. But then we go and play West Ham in midweek in the EFL Cup, and we absolutely smash them. 4-0 victory. Shandon Baptiste is giving Jack Wiltshire the runabout, and yeah, it's just an absolutely superb atmosphere. We then have a tricky fixture, you'd say, against Gillingham in the league. It's always difficult to come down from a very good cup result and then perform in the league, and yet inside 34 minutes we were out of sight, and at half time Gillingham are fortunate not to be maybe 5 or 6 down, and it's just something that, I suppose it's been building, to be fair, from the Oxford fans I spoke to, because we've been playing really good football. We've looked very sort of in tune side at times, but we haven't been finishing our chances. Not so yesterday. And Si, let's get your opinion on it, because we're both long-term Oxford fans, and it's been. I don't want to get too carried away about the start of the season or just this week, for example, because it's a long, long season. But it is delightful to actually see Oxford United play this way and be clinical for a change.
Yeah, I think you just got to enjoy moments like this. As you say, it was a decade ago we were still a National League team, and I remember 11, 12 years ago seeing us lose 5-2 at Histon and Droylsden and places like that in non-league football. So, it does highlight just how far we've come when you have a week like this. And look, I'm still not convinced that we maybe have got enough about us, maybe enough nous and experience in that team to be a top 6 club this season. I hope we are. I think there's a hell of a lot of potential. I think the thing with Oxford at the minute, playing the way we are, scouts are going to be watching. I'm sure Cameron Brannigan is going to be the one that we're going to be struggling to hold on to in January. The way he's been playing as well since coming back into the team, Shandon Baptiste as well. That's always your worry when you start having a bit of success. So I think we've just got to live for the moment, really. Football's so strange, isn't it? 10 days ago, when we drew 0-0 with Bolton, I dare not even listen to the Radio Oxford phone in after the game because the daggers were out. How dare we only draw 0-0 against Bolton Wanderers? Well, that result has proven to be not a bad result at all since then, and the performances that have followed have been nothing short of exhilarating. We've had wins against Swindon, we've had individual cup victories, we've had a few promotions down the years as well, but if you look at us as weeks go, they just don't get much better than this. And I've been having a bit of a debate with my uncle about this as well, actually. He's the one who got me into Oxford United all those years ago, as to whether that 4-0 win against West Ham is the greatest cup win in our history. Because I'd make the argument for that, given the fact that in the 1980s, when we claimed the scalp of your Evertons, your Liverpools, your Arsenals and Manchester Uniteds, the gulf between the teams was obviously a lot smaller back then, but also it's the way that we did it, to win 4-0, and again it wasn't a flattering scoreline. And I was actually quite annoyed with the mainstream media because a lot was made of the 9 changes for West Ham. Well, firstly, Ops have made 6 changes of their own, but
exactly.
Secondly, they had £100 million worth of talent out there on the pitch, and they picked up Jack Wilshere for nothing. And then when it wasn't going their way, they bought another 70 million off the bench. So, this wasn't a reserve team in terms of that full of youngsters. I think there was only one youngster featuring that hasn't been considered, a first team player for West Ham. So, yeah, look, back to Oxford, I think you just got to enjoy the moment. And yesterday, it was one I feared. I was telling everybody I think we're going to slip up in this because, coming back to an atmosphere with only 6,500 there, which is a bit disappointing. And after that cup tie on Wednesday, when Gillingham have had a clear week in the build-up to it, I thought that was a real banana skin. So to go and win 3-0 and to be 3 up inside half an hour, I think is, a real sign of how far we've come. And, we might well step up next weekend. So I think we've just got to enjoy the moment, really.
Well, we're just a lucky team, Si, really. 5 clean sheets in all competitions on the bounce, 16 goals without reply. It's funny how luck works sometimes, doesn't it?
It is. And, I enjoyed voicing that one yesterday, I must admit, with Steve Evans. But the team talk was done. Sometimes I'm left scratching my head with some of the things that Steve Evans does because he's an experienced manager. Fair, and he has had success in the past. And it's funny he was talking about Oxford has spent a lot of money, considering he bought success with and Rotherham United and spent quite a lot down at Mansfield as well. So he's a good one to talk about that. But why would you come out with something like that before a game, which clearly just motivate the opposition players if they need a little bit of motivation? That gives them that extra 10%. It just seems a mad thing to do for somebody who's been around the block for as long as Steve Evans. But there you go. That's why everyone loves him and loathes him, I suppose.
Yeah, to be honest, as well, I think he had a Barney, didn't he, with Paul Lambert last week, and his comments about Oxford this week. I mean, the more clinical we get, I suppose. It's the kind of the thing that's been missing from our football. I was at Blackpool with Chris at the start of the season, and we dominated that game. In fact, I would say that was the best we've played that I've seen us this season live. And I'd argue that we were almost better in that Blackpool game than we were yesterday. But we just, we hit the post. Their keeper made some really good saves, and we didn't have that clinical finish. But in terms of football, it was all there. It was a very exciting sort of team to watch. I think Chris Cadden has really added something to our play because he's given us nice balance and a forward thrust on the right. He's basically a right midfielder or right winger playing at right back, and he's doing a superb job. And it gives us a nice balance with Ruffles on the other side, who's improved no end. But like you say, Cameron Brannigan, possibly our next big sale, although you could argue Rob Dickey, Shannon Baptiste, these guys could also be on their way out sooner rather than later. The January window is always a dodge one for Oxford as well because Chris Cadden could go back. I'm not sure how long we've got Matty Taylor for, but there's always risks. So enjoy it, Oxford fans, while you can. It was a fantastic game of football yesterday. The East Stand was rocking as well, and really good to see Oxford fans enjoying their football. And like I say, Si, the only thing I'd say about the cup win, I think maybe Leeds, was it in 93-94 where we beat them 3-2? Because people forget that Leeds team had won the top division title just the year before, I think.
Yeah, a couple of years before, wasn't it? Yeah, exactly. I mean, it is a very subjective one, but I mean, the argument I put was that the manner of that victory the other night as well. But it'd be interesting to know. I mean, I was chatting to Gabe in pre-season. He was putting together his prep for the pre-season, the brilliant pre-season kind of previews that he does, and it's just mad how it changes because we were having a conversation about the middle of July about Oxford's prospects for the season, and at that time, it was really hard for me to gauge how good we were going to be because we hadn't even got squad together then. And it's maybe now, on reflection, no surprise that they made a bit of a slow start because a lot of the business was done so late in the window, literally right up to the transfer deadline with Matty Taylor. So this squad has been kind of growing quite late into the season, but it was very difficult to predict exactly where we were going to come. So I don't know what the sort of view is on where we would be now, but it's funny because it's very hard sometimes to kind of preview a team in pre-season before the squad is in place. But I certainly know I was far from optimistic looking at it, even though I knew that it was going to be pretty much dependent on the number 9 and the number 5 slots being filled properly in that team, which I think we have done pretty well with Elliot Moore and Matt Taylor.
Yeah, very impressed with Elliot Moore. Very impressed with Elliot Moore.
Yeah, I mean, just sort of pitching in from the outside, it feels like those kind of areas, as well as the right back, which James mentioned, Chris Cadden, obviously. I think those were the kind of the key areas to strengthen, because it was almost like going into the season. It was kind of on a knife edge where if you did make those right additions, which is what happened, you'd be looking at a really exciting Oxford team, possibly one of the most exciting teams since. You could argue I'm not 100% up to date on the history, but since the 80s roughly, because anyway, so there's that side of it. But on the other hand, I think if you'd not got the right additions, then you'd be looking at a squad with too many midfielders that's too imbalanced, and possibly for another relegation struggle, which you'd been in danger for the last 2 seasons. So I think it was so important to get those right additions, and in Matt Taylor, Elliot Moore, as you mentioned, and Chris Cadden, you've got the right players in, and it's really made a difference to your squad, it seems.
Yeah, it's been brilliant.
Yeah.
It's been brilliant to watch, and I would say as well, I mean, in terms of excitement, if this squad stays together, and I think the important thing is we stay fit, because we've only got about, I'd say, 13 or 14 sort of top players in that first team squad that you can rotate. Like if Rob Dickie is injured for any length of time, he went off yesterday. We've only got Mousinho and Elliot Moore as backup. There is no other centre back recognisable in that squad really. So we're a bit thin on the ground, and that's always going to be the way with Oxford United and the budgets that we have. I don't really think we've spent that much. I mean, I know what Steve Evans is probably looking for an excuse, but we haven't spent a huge amount of money. Our budget is not massive compared to some in this division, and I'm quite proud of the squad that we've managed to put together so far. But for Gillingham, a little bit disappointed with what I saw. I was expecting a lot more. I think they played quite well against Ipswich in a close game last weekend, and they just seemed, especially in the first half, off the pace. They made a bit more of a contest of it in the second half, but I think Steve Evans he'll be hugely disappointed with the way his team performed. And I think Gillingham fans in general, there's a good crowd of them up there. Nearly 500 turned up, and I thought they sang until the end, actually, to be fair to them. But I just think, they were outplayed on the day, and they need to start games a bit quicker than that. They've got a massive one against Southend next, so we'll keep an eye on how they do in that one. I'll be interested to get Matt's thoughts prior to that about how they go about bouncing back from such a sort of disappointing performance. Another team that I thought we definitely have to talk about today, guys, is Fleetwood. They went to Shrewsbury, who I'll get some Shrewsbury fans' views on their performance yesterday, because it didn't sound great, but fair credit to Fleetwood for the way they've started this season. Yes, we know that they spend a lot of money compared to perhaps their income. They're well funded by chairman, but they've lost twice all season, unbeaten in the last 4 in the league. They're scoring a lot of good goals. I think they have more shots from inside the 6-yard box than any other side. Paddy Madden is ruthless. Gabe, what have you made of them? I've been so impressed.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think last season I'd say they were clinical, because I think they had, excuse me, Paddy Madden, Chet Evans, obviously, and Ash Hunter, who were quite good in the final third. But I felt maybe in the middle third weren't quite as strong. And I think this season they got Paul Coots from Sheffield United, who, until he got injured in that 17-18 season for the Blades, probably one of the best midfielders in the Championship. So to have him in League One fit is a real plus. Jordan Rossiter, again, he was a bit of a metronomic presence in Bury's midfield last season, and I think he's a real talent on loan from Rangers. So I think you got 2 players who are exerting a real level of control, and I think the football's starting to flow from that, and that's why they're maybe able to get the ball into the final third perhaps more often than they were able to last season. And of course, we've seen a really clinical finish. I think it was the 3rd goal that Madden finished, absolutely ruthless first time strike from Madden. I mean, he can do that at this level. I mean, across this decade, you'd be hard pushed to find a more clinical striker for League One than Paddy Madden. And
Ian Henderson comes to mind. I think that's the only one I can think of, probably.
Sorry?
Only Ian Henderson really comes to mind.
Henderson, yeah, good strike, good shout, yeah. So I think they're starting to look like a really complete side now, Fleetwood.
I like the additions that they brought in. I mean, Jimmy Dunn's impressed me, because I think at Sunderland he was a bit hit and miss. But I think Danny Andrew and Harry Souttar, I go on about Harry Souttar far too much, to be fair. But I mean, he is just such a good centre back, and I'm surprised looking at Stoke the other night when I watched them that they haven't got a place for him, because their defending is terrible. Like, Nathan Jones gets the criticism, and whether he'll keep his job at Stoke remains to be seen. But if they can't defend, then he's not going to do very well, regardless of how good a football they played and how well they attack. And I think Harry Souttar is a guy who could probably play at a high level. It's always hard to know because he's still quite young, but he's big, he's strong, he's decent on the ball. Danny Andrew had an excellent balance. Peter Clark as well. That was a very shrewd signing because he is hugely experienced and easily good enough to play at this level, despite the fact he's getting on a bit in years. So fantastic squad they've put together. Wes Burns as well. A huge fan of his. I think he's one of the highest assisters so far in League One this season. And if you've got a player like him feeding Ched Evans and Paddy Madden, obviously you're going to do well. But a 3-0 win against the Shrews yesterday. Shrewsbury, they're a bit of an enigma, and they have been for I'd say since Paul Hurst left, because they've had a lot of turnover of players, obviously gone through a couple of managers. I don't see them being a side that will struggle too much this season, but the results so far are a little bit inconsistent.
Yeah, I think the league table is very much reflective, 12th at the minute, of where I'd imagine they will be there or thereabouts at the end of the season. They've got a manager in, it's his first job, so you have to allow a bit of wiggle room for him to kind of learn the trade on the job, if you like. I do like the kind of some of the names that he's got in the squad. And you look at some of the front players in particular, Jason Cummings, if they can get his head in the right place, no doubt about it, a very good player at League One level. Callum Lang up front as well. And of course, Steve Morrison, who is injured at the moment, but and Ebanks Landell as well, a decent player at this level. You've had success at this level as well. So definitely got enough about them to survive this year. I mean, on paper, a 3-0 defeat against Fleetwood looks bad, but particularly that last goal from Paddy Madden, it was absolute class. I think 3-0 was maybe a little bit harsh on them, on balance of what I was reading, but sort of back to Fleetwood. I think Danny Andrew is a real key signing for them because the left-back's set-piece delivery, he was so crucial for Doncaster last season, probably one unsung heroes that made it into the playoff last year. So not the kind of player that is a headline maker necessarily for Fleetwood, but I think his addition to the squad in more than one way gives them an extra dynamic that really seems to be working for them at the moment this season.
I like looking at Shrewsbury's results in those colour-coded ways. You've got green for win, red for loss, and yellow for draw. At the moment, it reads win, loss, draw, win, draw, loss, draw, win, draw, loss. It's literally, it's all over the place. So a little bit of a run to go on there with them and a bit of consistency. Perhaps their fans would like that. But I do agree. I think they've got a good squad. I think Ollie Norburn, Ryan Giles are two very exciting players, and Josh Laurent as well can add something when he's on his game. So they've got a decent squad. I just feel I don't think many teams will find Fleetwood easy. I mean, they're Oxford's bogey team, but I think maybe they're just a class act, and there'll be a lot of teams who will call them their bogey team this season. Speaking of Doncaster, they drew 1-1 at Coventry. Coventry remain unbeaten, a hugely impressive start to go 10 games and without defeat throughout the season. So huge credit to Coventry City, but massive credit as well, Gabe, to Doncaster. Just briefly, I think they've done a lot better than I probably gave them credit for in pre-season.
Yeah, I think so. It was quite a difficult job for Darren Moore to do because of the number of players that left. Obviously, John Marquis had been their main talisman over the last 3 years, plus the key loanees from the previous campaign, Malik Wilkes and Herbie Kane. You're looking at Danny Andrew going to Fleetwood as well and things like that. So it was very much a substantial rebuild for Donny, and I'm actually a bit surprised at how quickly they've been able to kind of establish a clear playing identity. And I think they've done really well. I mean, Niall Ennis on loan from Wolves, he's looked a really strong addition for them up top. I think with Wilkes gone, Kieran Sadler sort of seems to have stepped up. Sheaf on loan seems to have been a solid addition for them. So yeah, it's been a positive start, and I think getting a point at Coventry, which no team has done so far this season, or a point at St Andrews, if you like, it's a great start for them.
Yeah, fantastic start. Really impressed. They've got Portsmouth next. That'll be a tricky one for Kenny Jackett. Si, what do we make of Portsmouth? Because they've got, no doubt their squad is hugely talented. That goes without saying. They've got the players on paper to do fantastically well. Obviously, they had a little bit of a drop-off about Christmas last year. Picked it up again towards the end of the season. But they have not started this season well. Fans already calling for Jackett's head. There was some boos as players were subbed yesterday. A lot was made of Ronan Curtis's comments about, they need the fans on side, or they need the 12th man. He tweeted out, and a lot of furore went on about that. I don't know what your thoughts are on it, really. It's slightly bizarre that they've struggled quite as they have.
Yeah, I mean, I was properly bigging up some of the signings they made in the summer as well. I thought, they were signings. Marcus Harness really impressed me second half of the season for Burton Albion. John Marquis, we know all about him and the goals that he brings to the team. So I couldn't see anything but a challenge for promotion. Ryan Williams as well, very impressive winger at that level of football, added to the quality they've got. But I wonder whether it almost created too many problems for Kenny Jackett in terms of what his strongest 11 is. And it's interesting that he's gone back to the tried and tested. Brett Pittman wasn't really getting much game time last season as well, often a bench player, but restored to the starting lineup at the weekend. And in the end, it was his winner, even though he missed a penalty as well, that got them the 3 points against Bolton. But you've got a situation there as well where you get a 1-0 win against Bolton in a not great, most convincing of fashion. And even though this is a much changed Bolton team now, I think that won't go a great deal of the way towards appeasing supporters. It is a real head-scratching situation. The only thing I would say in Kenny Jackett's defence, and I have to say Portsmouth are one of the few teams I haven't seen in League One at this stage in the flesh yet this season, but they have got games in hand on some of those teams above them. And even if they win those two matches, which I know their form might not suggest they will, but they'd be right up there 10th in the table and very much on the coattails of those playoff positions again. But, performances on the pitch rather than the games they got in hand are probably what the fans are most worried about at the minute. And in the case of John Marquis especially, the goals just have not come for an investment that at the time it looked like a really, a massive investment in £2 million at that level. But at the minute, it's proving, not to be a great investment at all. And I've already heard murmurings. I saw a few people on Twitter on Friday after that Stoke game saying, what odds on Nathan Jones being the Portsmouth manager come the end of 2019?
That would be quite interesting. That would be very interesting. But in John Marquis' defence, I will just say he has been very unlucky, and I fully expect his form to turn. In terms of like the performances he's put in, I think they've been okay. It's just sometimes strikers go on a bit of a goal drought. You wanted to chip in, Gabe?
Yeah. I'd like to weigh in. I've actually got the XG data for Portsmouth here, and in terms of their XG ratio, there's actually no team that's posting as good shot data as Portsmouth this season. So I can understand why some fans might have qualms about the style of football, but this idea that they're portraying that Kenny Jackett's a dinosaur and that the players have given up on him, I actually don't agree with that. I mean, fans are saying that he's lost the dressing room, but actually Ronan Curtis Ronan Curtis was saying we need the fans behind you. We want to create a sense of togetherness, and they're saying no because when actually he was actually defending Kenny Jackett. So to me, it just doesn't quite make sense. And the other point I'd like to make is that Jackett actually led Portsmouth to get 88 points last season in 46 games, and that was their second season at this level after promotion in 2017. I think that was a fantastic achievement. And that was actually Jackett's second highest points return in a full season at this level as a manager. So has the game changed drastically since last season that Kenny Jackett is now a dinosaur? That doesn't really sit with me. So
me neither.
So I think Portsmouth have had a bad start. They're not where they want to be in the table, but I think they just needed that one win to really sort of catalyse them up towards a run. I think they'll get there. I think they're good enough. I think there have been elements of promise in terms of the performances with, as you mentioned, Marquis has been okay. You're looking at Marcus Harness, is a player I really like. The partnership of Sean Wragge and Christian Burgess, I think, is something they can build on. And I believe that they will go on a run. And I think Jackett will be the man to lead them on that run.
Yeah, let's hope so. I'm a big fan of Kenny Jackett, and I don't agree with all the fans' sort of vitriol and sort of comments that they've made about him. And like you say, if you've got that shot data and you can see that there is actually on the pitch something happening which the fans aren't quite seeing or not quite relaying, then I hope Portsmouth do turn it round, and I do hope that they keep the faith. I know the Coventry game was for some, I think my brother-in-law included actually, who's a big Pompey fan. That's where he felt that he didn't want to see Jackett continue leading the team. Again, I don't know. I don't agree with managers going on one bad run. I get tired of it, and I think potentially you look at Carl Robinson last season. He had a shocking run at some stage where we ended up going to Plymouth, losing 3-0 on, was it New Year's Day, I think, and we were dreadful. And you
Accrington as well.
Yeah, I mean, you could see. I mean, even against Accrington, I was losing the faith a little bit, and I have to say that if you keep faith in a manager and you let him build, you can see what can be achieved. So, yeah, I'm not a fan of it, and I hope he turns it round and they do go on a good run. Good performance by Bolton again. I think they're going to be a side that I'm far harder to beat than people give them credit for, based on the performances I've seen since Keith Hill took over. I think he's a fantastic manager and he'll do very well there. Big ask to keep them up, but I think fans will just be happy if they keep performing the way they are. Rochdale, they got beat 3-0 by Wycombe after that wonderful performance in the Cup. Wycombe, though, they're a bit of a ruthless side this season. Absolutely brilliant performance from the Chairboys side. Are you surprised by how well they've started, even though we know what Gareth Ainsworth's sides can produce?
For me, I've seen Wycombe a couple of times this season now, and they're one of the teams I always enjoyed going and watching because I've nothing against the slightly more old school football, if you like. And Wycombe, I think they're reinventing themselves a little bit this year, and people don't always give them credit that they deserve in terms of, they've got some decent footballers in their squad. It's not all balls up to Akinfenwa, but obviously when you've got a target up there like him, it's impossible not to try and play for his strengths when you need to. But this year they've got a really perfect mix, and let's not forget, given the summer, that again, this is a team that they couldn't really put a squad together until quite late in the summer when they got a fresh cash injection. But I really like the balance of the team. David Wheeler's managed to way into the side now, a player with big things expected when he moved up to the Championship a couple of years ago. And I think that's where the specialised thread on Udimma, who scored a couple of goals at the weekend, really skillful little front man. And you've got that big man, little man strike partnership. You've got Kashket, who's available to come off the bench as well and help in attack. I really like the look of them. Whether they can sustain it, I don't know, because, again, you talk about squads and, I think the depth that they've got within their squad. I remember interviewing Gareth Ainsworth after they beat Southend at the end of August, and he was basically alluding to the fact that, things aren't great at the minute, but we kind of need to get as many points on the board as we can now, because you get into the bleak midwinter, a couple of injuries could really hit this squad hard. And I think that's where, their downfall might be. But one thing they've got that maybe other teams around them haven't got in such abundance is a team spirit and togetherness, which, it's no coincidence they've had to come from behind to win a lot of their games so far this season. They scored a lot of late goals as well. And one thing kind of stuck with me, that victory against Southend, when I was waiting to do the interview with Gareth Ainsworth afterwards, Akinfenwa had been on the bench that day. He came on for the last 15 minutes of that match, and he was absolutely buzzing. They scored a couple of injury time goals, and he was with Gareth Ainsworth. He was picking them up in a bear hug, and even though he wasn't starting that game, and he had a fleeting contribution to that match, you could just see that the dressing room is so together there. And I think spirit counts for so much, particularly for a team like Wycombe Wanderers. And they are probably the offensive team, and the team that I think a lot of people will start getting behind if they can sustain this for a few more months this season, which Shrewsbury did it a couple of years ago, so it definitely can be done.
It definitely can be. Exciting times for the Chairboys fans. Blackpool, they beat Lincoln City 2-1. Fantastic goal by Thompson in this game, nutmeg and finish. Lincoln, obviously Michael Appleton's first game in charge. It's going to take him a little bit of time. I did see someone on Twitter suggest that his tactics aren't working at Lincoln City, and I did point out that he'd only been in charge for 25 minutes at that stage. So maybe give him a little bit of time to get those right. And I'm a huge fan, as you'd expect, of Michael Appleton. So I'd like to see how he does once he's had a little bit more time with this squad to get his ideas across. But at Blackpool, not many people will go to Bloomfield Road and win this season. It's quite a difficult place to go. Blackpool 6th in the table for a good reason, and another good performance from them. Bristol Rovers, they've had a brilliant start. Johnson Clark Harris inspired, you might say, but I would also say that they have a nice balance to their team this year. Again, not the deepest squads, and also obviously Johnson Clark Harris, already rumours circulating about January bids coming in from several Championship clubs for him. So that one will have to play out its course, and it could have a big impact on their season. But no doubt they'll be delighted with the the way that they've opened the campaign, beating Rotherham 1-0. Rotherham, a good side, not yet started particularly well, and some fans, just according to Ian Bradley, starting to turn a little bit on Paul Warne, which is a shame because I think he's a good manager and a good coach. But fans are fans, as we've been talking about Portsmouth. They expect results, and we're all a bit fickle when things aren't going quite well. But it's not been an atrocious start, and I would suggest that they just calm down just a little bit and give them a. Yeah, sorry, mate.
Sorry, yeah, I'd just kind of like to weigh in on the Rotherham situation. It's kind of a funny one because I think Paul Warne's someone that I've got loads of respect for as a person. I'm sure a lot of Rotherham fans do. I think one of his main strengths is his ability to kind of connect people and find sort of marginal gains and get everyone on the same page. I must admit, I'm not necessarily massively sold on him as a tactician. Now, that may seem harsh because Rotherham probably were at the bottom end of the budget. Well, they were at the bottom of the budgetary sort of rank, if you like, in the Championship, and it was very difficult to build a competitive team there. But I think if you look at how they created chances, a lot of it was kind of sort of pumping balls into the box towards Ajayi to Michael Smith, and I don't necessarily know how much of that was necessarily tactical. So I mean, in terms of, we talked about Kenny Jackett, and I think with Jackett, his CV is there to be seen. He's won so many promotions. He's got a fantastic track record at League One level. With Paul Warne, okay, he took Rotherham up a couple of seasons ago, but for me, he's someone that I'd have maybe one or two more question marks about from a personal perspective.
Yeah, maybe. Like I say, it's still early days, and they're not in a disastrous position. So, and it's like you say, the losses they have suffered have tended to be fairly marginal. I think he's a good motivator. He's a good coach, like you say, gets people behind him, and he's had a lot of turnover. If you look at the players that have left this summer, 5 or 6 very, very good players. And they're not going to be easy to replace, even though they probably got a little bit bigger budget than some at this level based on their Championship exploits of the last campaign. But we'll have to give him a bit more time, keep an eye on how he does. I think Rotherham fans, because he is a bit of a fan favourite, will give him a bit longer as well. Southend, they continued their poor start to the campaign. A red card and a 1-0 defeat, again without scoring against Accrington. Still rumours circulating that Henrik Larsson could be their new manager. I think that would be, it'd be interesting. It'd be a typical sort of League One story. We've had Joe Barton come to Fleetwood, obviously Sol Campbell to Macclesfield. So why not Henrik Larsson to Southend? That'd be perfect, wouldn't it? Sunderland, 2-1 win over MK Dons. MK Dons, am I right in saying, guys, that they still have not drawn a game this season at this level?
MK Dons.
I'm pretty sure I think last week I looked and they hadn't drawn a single game, and I think I'm right in saying that's the case still.
Yeah, played 10, won 4 and lost 6, and 3 of those defeats have come in the last 3 games after that result at Sunderland as well. And even though 2-1 was the scoreline in that game, watching the highlights of that yesterday, and looking at the feedback from supporters and match reports as well, I think 2-1 was a bit unflattering for Sunderland. Really, I think they could have won by a lot more given the sort of opportunities they had in that game. So no disgrace going down 2-1 at Sunderland, obviously, but MK Dons, maybe in those early season thoughts of mounting a promotion push this year, about back-to-back promotion push like Luton Town, maybe reevaluate that a little bit now.
Yeah, I always thought that was a little bit ambitious. I think a lot of fans, probably with a little bit less sort of giddy, sort of emotional giddiness about the promotion they just achieved, would have said mid-table consolidation, would be fine. And you look at the squad and you think they will achieve that. They rely on Nombe up front to sort of create and score chances. He's a very young, raw talent, hugely, I suppose upward ability. He's going to be absolutely massive player for them going forward if they can keep hold of him, of course. But they do lack, I think, I suppose Chuck's an EK style player really, and that's something that they're going to have to work around. I think Reece Healy's a good player. If they can keep him fit, then he'll be an important player for the season. But, it's going to be one of those campaigns, I think, of ups and downs for Paul Tisdale's side. But, yeah, I think anyone worrying too much about the 3 games in a row that they've lost probably just calm down a little bit. It's been been a marginal in those games as well. I noticed, a 1-0 defeat to Southend and a 1-0 defeat to Ipswich against an Ipswich side where MK Dons should have probably got a goal, should have got something from that game, and a 2-1 defeat up at Sunderland, who are a good side. And, they've started the season really well, despite all the sort of talk about Jack Ross and his tactics. They've only lost once this season. So, I don't know, at least it wasn't a 1-1 draw. That's all I'll say. Really good to see them not trying to stay on their traditional path, breaking away from patterns and all that, and getting a 2-1 win. Final game to talk about, Gabe. Let's get your opinion on this, because Ipswich Town, they're flying high, unbeaten at the top of the table. They were a side that we all thought would do quite well because they've got quite a good squad. A bit thin, but still a good squad. But they've not disappointed, have they?
No, certainly not. It's interesting. They beat Tranmere 4-1 yesterday, but you kind of felt like they owed Tranmere something, because probably 3 of their more important players this century they've actually got from Rovers, with John McGreal, the centre-back, obviously Aaron Cresswell a bit later on, and now James Norwood. Probably Tranmere will feel that they owed them something. But anyway, yeah, I think it was a fantastic second half performance from Town. They look really incisive in transition, with sort of Jackson stretching the play. Norwood brings obvious quality, and then you got the likes of Downs and Nolan really running on. So I think a lot to be encouraged by for Ipswich, and their defensive record is really strong as well.
Flynn Downs, what a young player he is. I'm really excited about the prospect they have in him. Nolan as well. We forget, he's a guy that sort of went off the radar a little bit after struggling in the Championship, but at this level, when he was here with Shrewsbury last time, was absolutely fantastic. Caden Jackson, a player that Accrington fans know is capable of a huge amount. And Kane Vincent-Young, I love this guy. He was brilliant for Colchester. I'm just shocked that he's doing so well sort of on the opposite side to where he's been used to playing for most of his career. So really good stuff. And Luke Garber, well, I'm shocked at the fact that he's actually doing as well as he is. To be fair, he looked a lot better at the end of his spell at Oxford, and he's playing further forward. And I say to most Ipswich fans, you probably want to keep him there, because as a defender I was never convinced, but certainly a free kick taker and a dead ball deliverer. Not bad at all. For Wimbledon, results have not got any better this week. Glyn Hodges taking charge of the game after Wally Downs was suspended by the club for breach of betting rules. Apparently he placed 8 bets on games of football, I believe it was, and it saw the club issue an immediate suspension. I don't want to be cynical at all here, but I don't think Wally Downs has had quite the effect this season on Wimbledon that the fans had hoped, and they're kind of back in the same kind of rut that they saw themselves or found themselves in at this stage last season. So whether or not this is somehow a blessing in disguise in one respect, because I think Wally Downs was the perfect appointment to get them out of trouble. I was less convinced that he'd be the man to lead them through the summer, and the recruitment certainly looked pretty difficult for them with the players they lost. They haven't won a game yet in the division, though. They put on a good display in the second half yesterday against Peterborough. Gabe, your thoughts? Obviously, regardless of the suspension, Wimbledon's form is not great, and would you agree that perhaps a new manager is needed?
I suppose so, yeah. It's an interesting one, because the Wimbledon were actually a team I was quite sweet on in terms of maybe pushing for the top half in the summer, just because of their form under Downs in the second half of last season. They found some real momentum, and actually there was quite a lot to like about them in terms of the way they pressed and played with real energy. But I think losing Aaron Ramsdale, who's now playing in the Premier League, and Steve Seddon, who's now playing in the Championship, I suppose in terms of Seddon, Nesta Guinness-Walker, you could argue, has been one of their better players. So there is that sort of perspective. But generally, they've kind of just not been able. I think the one problem is they've generally played well in one half and terribly in another. So you can they've never sort of had a performance where they're good in one half and then sort of did the job in another. They've always sort of crumbled in one of the halves in either sort of put in a spirited display to try and get it back and not quite got there, or
Well,
they.
just to back your point up there, 6 games this season they've taken the lead in and then failed to see them through.
Yeah, and then even games where they haven't taken the lead in, like away at MK, for example, they went 2-0 behind at half time, and it was loads of anger from the fans in terms of how they performed. Second half, actually, the subs made a difference, and they played quite well, but they couldn't quite get back in it. So for whatever reason, they can't put two halves of football together, and I think that's been the main problem. And to be honest, I do fear for them this year. I really do.
Yeah, it's going to be difficult. Si, your thoughts on Peterborough? The stat that basically all their goals have been scored by 3 players, bar one, which I think was scored by Josh Knight. I mean, that's remarkable, isn't it? After 11 games.
It is, and I did have real doubts about whether Mo Issa was worth the big money that they spent to bring him in the summer, based purely on the fact that he's done very well at League 2 level, having come out of non-league, but having got into Bristol City, by no means a player proven at even League 1 level, let alone Championship. So to spend so much money on him as a striker seemed like a big gamble for me. And having watched a couple of his early games at Oxford as well, it was backing up my point that it was a big risk. But I have to say, since then, he's absolutely categorically proven me wrong. And a couple of really good finishes as well against Wimbledon yesterday, albeit a bit of suspect defending from their point of view. And, that attacking threat, we always knew that Peterborough, their success this season was going to be built on those attacking players. But what brilliant players you've got, Madison, Issa Tony up front, and George Boyd as well. They're really getting game time at the moment, who I think could have a big say later on in the season, Kanu as well. So, it doesn't surprise me at all. I think we all expected Posh to be up there challenging defensively. I think it's, again, the goals they conceded on Saturday, maybe one of their shortcomings if they don't go in front in matches and the team can get a 1-0 and then try and eke it out and stifle that attack, whether they can, find a way through. But, looking very impressive. But from Wimbledon's point of view, I did watch their game against Bristol Rovers. I was at that game last week covering it, and for a lot of that game they looked decent, and sliding doors moments very much playing a part in that as well, because they were 1-0 up and then at 1-1. Anzi Yekla made a couple of really crucial saves for Bristol Rovers, which, if Wimbledon had gone in front, could have been a very different story. But they end up on the wrong end of a 3-1 defeat, and that seems to be the story of their season at the moment, not taking chances when they come. And yeah, I do really fear for them. It was maybe a little fortunate that they managed to get a manager in and galvanise them enough just to stay above the dotted line last year. But whether they repeat that again this season, I very much doubt it on the evidence we've seen so far. I think even though 3 teams go down from League 1 this season and not 4, they look by far and away, along with Southend, the worst teams at the moment, and quite rightly in those positions already cut adrift.
Indeed. So at the bottom you've got Bolton -9 points, Wimbledon on 3, Southend on 4, with a sort of fairly big gap, 5-point gap between them, Tranmere and Portsmouth, who have those 2 games in hand just above them at the top. Ipswich sit there unbeaten with remarkable 24 points. Really good start to the season for them. Wickham second, fantastic. Fleetwood third, Coventry fourth, and Sunderland and Blackpool making up the top 6. Right, let's jump in to League 2, where there was plenty of goals to talk about. But one unbeaten record came to an end. So let's jump in there now.
League 2.
And let's start with that unbeaten record coming to an end, because Exeter City lost to Grimsby Town 3-1 at St James's Park. Grimsby had a difficult game, it's fair to say, in midweek, losing at Chelsea 7-1. At least they did score a fantastic goal in that one, to be fair to them. But it wasn't a weak Chelsea side. It was one that's got a huge amount of talent. Ross Barkley obviously plays for England. Hudson-Odoi was in there. And Reece James, of course. God, they had some good players out there. So you can see that there would have been a bit of a downer, because when you take 5,000 fans to London for a big occasion and it's all falls flat, you can see that could be quite hard to get yourself up again from. But actually, side Grimsby, they've done really well. They've got a couple of good young players in there. Ethan Robson, obviously on loan from Sunderland, looks a real fine 2-footed midfielder. But actually Max Wright as well, homegrown talent. I would say this is probably his breakout season in terms of, this is the first time he's really caught the eye. He's pacey, he's quick, he's direct, he's obviously local. He's got all the passion and the desire to do well for his team, and he was phenomenal yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, they're a bit of an enigmatic team at the moment, I would say, this season, Grimsby. Before the game against Macclesfield, that they sort of eked out 1-0 last week. And as you say, Ethan Robson, what a player he can be for them. Another good loan signing from Sunderland, following on from Elliot Embleton last season. But they hadn't won in 4 league matches before that. And this is an important season for Michael Jolly, because last year they did okay. They finished a lot better. But I think expectation level be this year a little bit higher, and they've mixed their squad up with a bit of experience as well with James Hansen. I mean, they've got Elliot Whitehouse back from injury, which they were really unfortunate when they lost him. No sooner had he signed for the club, because I think he's a very decent midfield player at this level once they get him fit. But for me, Robson is the one that really stands out. I mean, the quality of his goals that he scored against Exeter yesterday, it was one of those results which is why I kind of ear myself away from gambling on League Two and League One, because it does throw up some proper random ones sometimes, doesn't it? And this certainly qualifies as that, given Exeter's unbeaten run this season. I think their best start to a season in well over a decade. So that finish from Ethan Robson, particularly for the first goal, was fantastic. The jury for me is still out on Grimsby, because this was the good, but we've also seen the bad. They are a bit of a Jekyll and Hyde side so far. So I'm not too sure what Grimsby Town, we'll see come the end of the season. But certainly it's enough to push them into the playoff positions for now. And you've got to stand up and take notice, particularly the quality of that performance at Exeter and the manner in which they got that victory.
Yeah, I think they've got some really good players. I think Luke Waterfall, that's going to be a shrewd piece of business. He's a good defender at this level, certainly. Not a huge depth at centre back with Ludwig Oman as well. He's had some injury problems. I think he's out again for a spell. So they do need to keep like the likes of Luke Waterfall fit. James McKeown has been a brilliant goalkeeper for them for years, but I think sometimes they've been too reliant on him. Actually, looking at the save data and shot data and stuff, they've tightened up a lot. They haven't exposed him quite so badly as they did over previous seasons. So maybe they won't have to rely on his exploits so much this season. But actually, the one improvement that I'm really enjoying is going forward. We talk about Max Wright and his pace and Ethan Robson from midfield, but truth be told, with Moses Ogbu, James Hansen, Matt Green, and Akeem Rose, they've got really good, talented forwards who can make all the difference at this level. It's whether they, like you say, can find that consistent level of performance week in, week out to be a playoff side. I'd like them to be. I think this is just quite a tight and talented division, so it remains to be seen whether they will be or not. But a fantastic result yesterday, brilliant performances, and they deserve huge credit. Not to give Exeter too much of a hard time, because that's their first defeat of the season, but they won't be particularly pleased with the way that they played. A lot of their games have been quite tight, and they've gotten away with a couple of their results this season. So Matt Taylor was rightly disappointed with his charges yesterday. Walsall, though, Gabe, let's get your opinion on them, because they really struggled at the start of the season, and I'm not saying it's all turned around because they've gone and got 3 straight great results. But James Clark, I obviously remember him breaking out and coming on as a player at Oxford. That's where he started out. He never scored goals like that for the Yellows. That's one thing I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fantastic result for them. I think probably the one positive that Darryl Clark can take from probably their performances generally this season has been maybe their organisation, and I think there has been a lot of positives from that. I mean, at the end of August, they're absolutely rock bottom. I watched them lose 3-1 to Grimsby, and you're sort of fearing for them a bit this season. But if I remember rightly, it was on that same day they confirmed the signing of Rory Gaffney, who's also played under Clark at Bristol Rovers. He brought a few of them, to be fair. Stuart Sinclair in there as well as James Clark's. And I always feel like with Gaffney, I'm not too sure whether he played yesterday, but generally I feel like he's quite selfless in his movement. And
definitely,
maybe,
yeah. Pretty good hold-up player.
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of think like you get some strikers that are kind of a bit more greedy and want to kind of get into goal-scoring areas, and maybe Adebayo might come into that category to some extent, whereas I think Gaffney will stretch play in the other direction and kind of give players the opportunities to get into those goal scoring areas, and maybe that's made a difference to them in terms of the chance of scoring goals.
Well, yeah, he got an assist yesterday, Gaffney. And that just, I think he'll get quite a lot of assists this season, and I think he'll actually be one of the more creative forwards just from his hold-up play. And that is something that we'll keep an eye on, because I think you're very right in saying that a selfless striker playing with some young, enthusiastic players like Josh Gordon and Adebayo, he could have a very positive impact on them. Colin Lavery as well is a good player. Unfortunately, he got injured in their recent game. I think it was last weekend, actually. So they have now got a few options. They've got very good organisation. You're not going to see them concede too many goals. Dan Scarr is coming on as a promising defender, but with James Clark and Matt Sadler and Zach Jules, to be fair, they're all big guys. They're all good defenders at this level, and I would imagine they'll have pretty good seasons. Crawley, I was a bit disappointed for them because, of course, they've just come off wonderful cup victory, but I think this is a case of a bit of a cup hangover. You're not going to concede goals like James Clark's week in, week out, and maybe it just gives them a little bit of a kick up the bum when they've been going on such a good run. So I've been hugely impressed with Crawley and the way they've improved this season over the last couple of campaigns. So not too concerned about the result for them. One result that really stood out for me, though, guys, was Newport County. Going to Swindon and keeping a clean sheet, and also scoring 2 goals. Fantastic performance from Mike Flynn's guys. He was so glowing about his players, said they all did their jobs perfectly. It was a really good game plan that they went there with. And it comes out with another 3 points, and 3 points that keeps them well up there in the playoff places. And Simon, I don't suppose we should really be surprised by Mike Flynn anymore and the way he gets this team sort of, I'd say, punching above their weight season in, season out.
Absolutely. I mean, he, along with Gareth Ainsworth, where they were the 2 managers very early on linked with the Lincoln City job. And I don't think it's any surprise that, the conversation we were having earlier about Gareth Ainsworth and galvanising that Wickham dressing room, very much something that Mike Flynn has done at Newport County as well. And I think when you've got that connection with the football club, and obviously he played for them for a number of years, he's from Newport as well, I think it makes it all that easier to get the buy-in from your players, because you genuinely, the club runs through your veins, and they're just continuing on from their brilliant season last year, really, aren't they, as well? And a team, the fear going into a new season when you lose at Wembley and your squad's broken up a little bit is whether it was just one good flash in the pan season and whether you can replicate it again. But this season, arguably, they're looking even stronger. And I think, from a Swindon perspective, the home form concerns me slightly. I watched them lose at home to Northampton Town back in August in a game which they were unlucky to lose, but they couldn't put their chances away. They've been scintillating at times. That victory at Leyton Orient a few weeks ago, they looked absolutely superb. But that's 3 home defeats now. They got hammered at home by Colchester as well, and they're losing to teams who are in and around them in the table on their own patch as well. And I think for their manager, that has got to be a big concern. 3 defeats by the end of September on your home patch. That's really going to potentially come back to bite if you're looking to get into those top 3 positions. They are pointing off the automatics at the moment, but they just can't keep losing home matches in that kind of manner as well. I've been really impressed with Swindon's squad this year. I do think they've got a strong squad. I do think they put together a very good team this year, and even with my Oxford United hat on, I have to say, I think they will be challenging, but in the end, I think Newport County, by all accounts, not 2-0, but they absolutely outfoxed them in every department, and I think that will be the biggest sort of concern for them at the moment.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. I think Swindon are one of the best footballing sides I've seen this season. John McGrill paid them a similar compliment when Colchester beat them, and I think he was well aware of what an achievement it was for Colchester to go there and get that result. I think Newport will do that to a lot of teams, to be fair, this season. Swindon have got some big games coming up. They've got to go to Bradford before hosting Plymouth and then going to play against Crewe. So these next 3 games, massive test of this squad and of their credentials. So it'll be interesting to see how they do in those games and how those games turn out. Really looking forward to seeing them play Crewe as well, because both sides play really nice football, and interesting to see who comes out on top. Colchester, speaking of them, they drew 1-1 at Macclesfield after their cup exploits in midweek, where they They beat Tottenham Hotspur on penalties, historic occasion. Back to the grind of the league, and where better to do it at Moss Rose, who are, it's always a difficult place to go and get points, and yeah, they'll be pleased with that. I think, their run that they've been on and the week that they've had, going there and not losing, which would have put a nice sort of a nasty dampener, I should say, on what was a brilliant cup win. They avoided that. They come back with a point, and they can build on that. They've started to show signs that they're improving. They've got good depth, good young players, so that's important. Carlisle picked up a 1-0 win over Oldham in a game which lacked a lot of quality. Oldham fans really disappointed with their side going forward in this one. Dino Maria, a lot of work to do to turn this side around. Not his squad, of course, but after beating Morecambe last weekend, this would have been a little bit of a downer, bit of a disappointment to go up there. I think they have about 500 fans travel north to Cumbria, and to come back with a 1-0 defeat and a fairly lacklustre performance as well will be hugely disappointing. Mansfield lost to Plymouth 1-0. Now, don't get me wrong, Mansfield's performances have been improving, but they're not getting results, Gabe. John Dempster, I hate to say it, but it does not look good for him, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him go back to being sort of the youth coach and then replacing him fairly soon if results don't turn.
Yeah, I think after the eighth game of the season, John Radford sort of put in a kind of a programme note where he sort of said after 10 games that's the marker for where we can judge progress or otherwise, and you just felt see it since that eighth game. They drew one and lost two now. Obviously with that 1-0 home defeat to Argyle. I have some sympathy for John Dempster in the sense that I think he's very new to senior management. It's very different to anything he's experienced before. And I think coaching senior players is very different to working with academy players. And ideally, he'd have a bit of a peace period, if you like, to kind of get his feet, get used to the differences and try to sort of just acclimatise a little bit. I think the problem that he's got is that he's working at a club that's expecting to get promoted or to at least challenge. I think over the last 3 years, John and Carolyn Radford have been very clear about their intentions. They remain very clear about that. They've said promotion is still the aim. And I've got to be brutally honest, I don't like calling out managers because I believe that it's always a collective issue what happens with the results. But I just think that having somebody that's supposedly going to lead you to promotion to really surge on a run that Mansfield really need, is that going to come from a youth team coach that's not too long ago retired from playing? It might yet be. John Dempster might yet turn out to be a great manager, but I'm just not seeing enough signs from my point of view in terms of performances and results. And I think that would be where I would have major question marks about the situation.
Yeah, I think a lot of Stags fans will echo those views as well. Si, you about to say something?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say I agree with Gav there completely. I mean, there are exceptions. You look at Main Lowe in his first job in a similar situation, took Bury up last year. But by and large, it doesn't work out when you appoint from within. And I think if you look historically, Ryan Lowe is maybe an exception to that rule, particularly given the fact that Mansfield aren't a season of consolidation. Like say when Sam Ricketts went, that's more a kind of job where he might stamp his mark on the team. You're not going to get that at Mansfield Town, and they are supporting it. He changes to his backroom team last week. He brought in Drew Broughton, which is quite an interesting appointment because he's been very active in the media, does a lot of sports psychology and things like that, but he's actually come in to do that, but to help with the coaching side of things at the club as well. Andy Burgess has come in as the head of scouting and recruitment. You might argue a bit of a job for the boys there. And then
I was going to say that.
Also given the goalkeeper. Yeah, but also given the goalkeeper coaching duties to their number one goalkeeper, Conrad Logan, which seems a little bit strange as well. I mean, how does that work on the training ground? You're the number one goalkeeper coach. So it's a bit strange. And I think that, results at the moment suggest that it isn't working for them. When it happened in the summer, it really raised my eyebrows. They've gone through a couple of maybe quite costly managerial appointments in Steve Evans and David Flitcroft. And you just, from the outside You wonder whether they could, having got rid of David Flitcroft, whether they could afford to bring in another experience, and whether maybe this was a cheap option, which seems a little bit absurd when you're still investing quite heavily in your first team squad. The fans certainly seem very disillusioned at the end, and reading some of the comments from John and Alex McDonald after the match as well, pretty much pleading with the home supporters to get behind their team as well. But from Chairman's perspective, when you start to think about acting, is when the attendances fall off as well, and less than 4,500 there yesterday with a sizable following from Plymouth as well. I think, again, from a chairman's point of view, that's when alarm bells start to ring, isn't it? When fans start voting with their feet. And if I'm being brutally honest, then I feel bad for John. Good bloke. But I can't see any way out of this one for him right now. Mansfield need to change quite quickly. We're 1/4 of the way through the season next week, and at the moment, 8 points off those playoff places, losing to teams that they should be beating. Plymouth, okay, maybe not the case, but this is a team that, like Mansfield, were expected to challenge for promotion at the beginning of the season, but they haven't been on a great run themselves. They haven't won in 5 matches before this fixture, so this was the game that they'd have been looking at to really be the catalyst for their season, and it just hasn't been the case. And at the minute, he's just not getting the best out of some, I would suggest, much better quality players than you're seeing on the pitch at the moment. The likes of Maynard, Cook, who's just coming back from injury, on the bench, Jacob Mellis on the bench, who's a very good midfielder at that level. I wonder whether he's just getting that squad moment. I think at the moment it doesn't look like that is the case at all.
No, I'd agree, and I think I do expect a change to be made personally. I think the programme notes that Gabe alluded to suggested as much, that unless there was improvement by about this stage, they would make a change. And there has been rumours that Phil Parkinson and Chris Coleman were both interviewed for the role and are thought to be prime candidates. So we'll have to wait and see what transpires there. Leyton Orient drew 3-3 with Port Vale. Ross Embleton has said he will step down back to his assistant's role, and as they step up the search for a new manager in East London. I think Sol Campbell being heavily linked with this role is not absurd. I think that he'd be a very good choice. Obviously, from London, good connections to some of the bigger London clubs as well. So he could be a shrewd appointment. And it was a great performance yesterday in terms of they're playing for their manager. No doubt about that. But I think Ross Embleton wants to see someone experienced come in, or someone who he feels he can work with to improve Leyton Orient. He sort of was put in charge of this team in hugely difficult circumstances. And I think he's done really well, and he's been a credit to his side and to the club. But I think once they get a manager appointed, it's always difficult when you're in a bit of flux and a bit of transition. You need that stability. The players will need to know who they're going to be taking their orders from, I guess you'd say, going forward. And that should be sorted within the next 2-3 games. Martin Ling, the director of football, alluded to that in a press conference this week. So they shouldn't have too long to wait before an appointment is made, but Ross Embleton may be in charge for the next couple of games at least. But we'll wait and see. But a 3-3 draw, great comeback, great determination after Port Vale looked to have sealed the win late on. But again, Port Vale, not a bad result from them. 3-3, they've got some injury problems at the minute. So John Asker, I think, has done a fairly decent job of improving the Vale. Stevenage, still no win at all. They drew 1-1 with Cambridge. I suppose if you look at the record against Cambridge, that they're a massive bogey side for Stevenage. So a point against them is not the end of the world. But when you're struggling down at the bottom, you want to be winning your home games, especially against local rivals. And a 1-1 draw in the end was probably fortunate for Stevenage, as Cambridge really did put the batters on them in the second half. Salford City not producing the sort of results the bookies had them down for in pre-season. 4-0 defeat to Forest Green. Forest Green have had the most clean sheets of any side in the top 4 tiers of English football in the league, 8 out of 11 games now. The only thing I'd had concerns about with this lot, Gabe, is that they weren't really scoring goals. So if they fell behind in matches, you feared for them a bit. But they've actually been brilliant at not allowing that to be the case. They haven't fallen behind in many games. And yesterday, the clinical finishing was pretty much a joy to watch. And I think their fans, they had a good following going to Salford, would have been delighted with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think from Forest Green's point of view, I think it's been really important that they've had the right defensive structure in place, because I think going forward, they probably haven't been quite as impressive as they were last season up to yesterday. I mean, I think in terms of actual good football from Forest Green, I'm thinking the second half against Oldham on the opening day, maybe a couple of examples, but they hadn't really sort of got into full flow where you think, yes, not only are they getting the results, but they're sort of really looking like a team that can go up in there and challenge. I think this is probably one of the first times where they've got that kind of result that's maybe a bit of a statement. And it's interesting actually, because they only had 9 shots and 5 shots on target yesterday. So I'll be interested to know from Forest Green fans who went, whether it was a 4-0 type of game. But it certainly sounds like, Erin Collins is a player at this level that I like. I think he's very energetic forward. Adams, obviously an international with Gambia, I think, and he seems to be sort of coming to the boil a little bit. So I suppose that's something for them to build on. And Jack Aitchison, of course, who scored
really exciting prospect, Jack Aitchison. Really exciting.
Yeah, scored the winner at Cambridge a couple of weeks ago, didn't he? So there's things to build on. I think Forest Green can improve certain aspects of their attacking play from the first couple of months of the season, but a 4-0 win won't half help.
I think I'd argue about their attacking play as well. Shepherd coming back as kind of an attacking wing back is massive. I think they've really missed him, and they've got Mills on the other side, and those two add really nice balance to that team. So he's had a struggling summer, Shepherd, but now he's getting himself back fit. He'll be an important player going forward for them, for sure. Morecambe, Jim Bentley under a bit of pressure. Great to see Kevin Ellison roll back the years and smash home a late equaliser to grab them a point, a much needed point, it has to be said, against Northampton, who have been going great guns over the last few weeks. Jim Bentley, I don't know rightly or wrongly whether he's under pressure there. I mean, I would argue who's going to do better with the budget that he's got. Not many, I would wager. But obviously, familiarity breeds contempt, I suppose, is an expression that sometimes is not that out of place in football. But if you look at the likes of Forest Green, where they've backed their manager even through difficult spells, I would always put that as an example to stick with someone who has got the club's best interest at heart and has certainly proven himself in the past. Last couple of games to look at. Let's start with Scunthorpe v Bradford. Bradford go there in that awful away kit. I'm sorry, Bradford fans. It's just terrible. It's kind of like railway men working at night, kind of, but without any sort of trimmings. Anyway, I won't go into it too much. This is not a fashion podcast, but I do not like that away kit. But again, they should have won that game, Bradford. Matty Lunn getting sent off for a lunge. It can only be described as that, and it was a straight red card. Paul Hurst really struggling, Gabe, at Scunthorpe. Not necessarily what some people expected.
No, I think in terms of recent performances, they obviously got a couple of good results. Sort of around the corner, they beat 3-0. Was it Morecambe a couple of weeks ago? So, and I think in terms of today, they played 70 minutes with 10 men. So actually, to get a point. Not a bad result against a team that will be expected to be competing for the playoffs in Bradford. And from what Scunthorpe fans have been saying, probably the defensive aspects of the performance probably encouraging. I mean, I think Junior Brown seems to be finding some decent form, and Rory McCardle alongside Harrison Maguire, they're sort of arguably League One centre backs historically, so at League Two that's something to build on. And yeah, I think a point with 10 men in terms of today is a decent step forward. But I think we should be under no illusions that 6 points from 11 games is probably not what Scunthorpe fans were expecting, and I think that then they need to improve across October.
Paul Hurst's reputation, Si, you'd say it's a little bit on the line here, because he's obviously had a poor run at Ipswich, come to Scunthorpe, who historically, at least in recent history, have been playing a lot higher than they are right now, and it's not been the best start for him.
No, but also historically, they've chopped and changed managers a lot in the last 2 or 3 years, probably too much. I remember them, making a change when they were still in the top 6 in League One. So, he's an experienced manager. He did very well at Shrewsbury with a similar sized club budget. Obviously, that move to Ipswich didn't work out, and it just shows how quickly your stock can rise and then fall again as a football manager. But this job, this year, again, I look back at maybe when Carl Robinson went in at Oxford 18 months ago and think, is this one where he just needs that time? He always said that once he gets players through injuries, because I think they had a pretty chronic injury list at the beginning of the season, but he also inherited a very big squad. And coming down into League Two, he was not only trying to build a team of his own, but doing so whilst trying to get rid of a few players as well. Now, I was quite surprised to see Adam Hamill move out on loan to Stockport County last week in the National League.
Well, they had a big argument, didn't they? Paul Hurst fell out with him big time.
Yeah.
And he was doing really well, actually, Adam Hamill, in terms of he was scoring in the under-23s a lot, and there was a lot of talk about maybe he'll come back into the team, but I think it was beyond repair, that relationship.
Yeah, exactly. So, that gives you a little insight into the kind of things that he's having to deal with within the dressing room there when he's trying to sort of stamp his mark on the team. And even though you would imagine in terms of ability would be one of your most important players to put into that side, you've obviously got to have the dressing room on side. So, it's pretty clear that he's got a big job on his hands at Scunthorpe this season. And, they don't have a divine right to be up there in the top 7 this season. But again, you're not talking about a John Dempster scenario here. You're talking about a manager who has got a proven record. He had, promotion with Grimsby before going to Shrewsbury Town as well. So, I wonder whether he just needs that time. And this year might not be the year, but he's working in the transfer market outside the window even now, bringing in Jamie Ward, who did well scoring his debut, albeit a penalty, but I think should be a really good player at that level. But I think just he's got a job on his hands to reshape that squad and remould it, and probably get a few, for want of a better word, a few bad eggs maybe out of that dressing room as well, in order to kind of rebuild that team again.
Yeah, absolutely. Agree. I think if you give him time, he will do a very, very good job. He's like you say, he's a proven manager, isn't he? At this level. So, really, really hope that Scunthorpe learn lessons from the past and give him the time they need. Gabe, we're just going to jump into your game now, where you went to see Cheltenham versus Crewe. Last but not least, certainly, because both sides flying high. Give us your thoughts on that game.
Well, it's an interesting one because I think aesthetically at 11v11, I would say that Crewe were the better team in terms of the way they moved the ball. I mean, the sort of the passing exchange for Chris Porter's equaliser, I don't know if you saw it, but it was fantastically smooth, and that was what they were trying to do all game, really. And I love that they have sort of Harry Pickering sort of coming inside as a fullback, because I think a lot of fullbacks tend to go on the outside, but I think the fact that Kirk stays out wide sometimes and Pickering comes inside, that can kind of confuse opposing teams, and I think they've really got something special in them, Crewe, and obviously a lovely finish from Porter. I think Cheltenham a little bit more direct, and I think in fairness to them, when Perry and G was sent off, they really seized the numerical advantage and really pushed for the goal. I think the substitutes they had, Alex Ardai and Chris Clements, made a difference to the Robins, and I think you've got to give them credit from that point of view. And actually, in the end, you'd probably say that the goalkeeper of Crewe, Will Jaskalainen, had maybe more to do than Cheltenham's goalkeeper, Scott Flinders, who only faced 2 shots on target all game. So I think in terms of Crewe, I think it's a good point for them, especially having played the last 20 minutes with 10 men. And I think Michael Duff said it after the game from Cheltenham's point of view, the fact that the players drew with one of the best teams in the league and were slightly disappointed maybe is a marker of progress. And I think while they maybe didn't use the ball quite as well as they can do, Cheltenham, especially at 11v11, they still carried a threat, and they still retained a level of organisation because their back three was so good. And I think it was a similar story at Argyle last week, and they've taken 4 points from arguably 2 of the best teams in the league in Argyle and Crewe without necessarily being at their best with the ball. And I think that shows that maybe they're a bit tougher than they were last season.
Interesting to see how this all ends, because they're both flying high at the moment. And let's have a quick look at that top end of the table. As I said, Exeter, they sit top at the moment, despite that defeat. Level on points with Crewe, who have been fantastic this season. a sign of how they've improved. Cheltenham would have bitten your hand off to be quarter of the way through the season and been in around that top three. Forest Green, not that surprised to see them up there, based on the goals that they've scored. They've only scored 11 goals this season in 11 games, only conceded 5. So fantastic record, I suppose, of attritional football, but with style. It's a strange combination, that winning 1-0 but playing lovely football to do it. Not something you see that often. Swindon Town and Newport and Grimsby make up the other teams at the top. At the bottom, Scunthorpe and Stevenage are in the bottom two. Stevenage still the only side without a win. Morecambe slightly concerned about their form and their performances in 22nd. Leighton Orient will be hoping in 21st that they can produce a bit of a run and a bit of a new manager bounce when they finally appoint. Right, guys, thank you for tuning into this podcast. Brilliant insight from Si Watts and Gabe Sutton this week. Si, really delighted that you've come on at a time when Oxford are doing well.
I know, it's, maybe we should make that more of a regular thing if they keep winning like this. But yeah, as I say, it's a good time to be an Oxford United fan. But Accrington Stanley away next week, we'll stay grounded because, it would be so Oxford United to go and lose at Accrington next week now, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would be. It's a bit of a bogey ground for us as well in recent seasons. So we're not getting carried away just yet. Not just yet. Gabe, thank you as always, mate, for your brilliant and knowledgeable insight.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And guys, thank you for listening, and we'll be back again next week for another D3D4 football podcast. Cheers, guys. Goodbye.